Breaking news, fam. And when I say breaking, I mean like your jaw is about to hit the floor. Your Wi-Fi router might spontaneously combust. And your grandma's prayer circle might log on just to confirm if what I'm saying is real. But guess what? It's not just real, it's messy. If you thought you'd seen Hollywood scandals before? What Jaguar Wright just dropped makes the Will Smith slap look like a Disney Channel blooper reel. Picture this: A-list parties, lights dimmed low, champagne flowing, cameras rolling, and not the kind of cameras you want your mama finding in the family album. Now ask yourself, if these walls could talk, would they whisper sweet nothings? Or scream out the secrets of infections, betrayals, and careers about to go poof? Because baby Jaguar is not just spilling tea, she's flipping over the entire kettle, tossing the tea bags, and pouring boiling water straight onto the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And the names she's attaching to this chaos. Let's just say, if you've ever danced to them, streamed them, or had them on your vision board, you're about to clutch those pearls so tight they turn into diamonds. Stick around because we're going down a rabbit hole that might just eat Alice alive. Listen, let us not act like Hollywood is only about red carpets, awards, and glamorous moments, because beneath all that glitz, there has always been a world of shadows where power and fame collide in the darkest ways. And if you thought the scandals that have already hit, the news were shocking, you have not even scratched the surface of what Jaguar Wright just set off, because the bomb she dropped makes every other Hollywood mess look like child's play. And right at the center of this chaos is none other than Sean Diddy Combs, the man who once built an empire on the back of music and fashion, but who is now drowning in allegations that sound more like the plot of a horror film than the life of a mogul. Diddy's name has been tied to controversy for decades, from his notorious temper to his industry beefs to the violent incidents that always seem to follow him. But what Jaguar is putting out there now goes way beyond bad behavior at a nightclub or lawsuits that can be settled quietly behind the scenes. This is the kind of dirt that makes entire fan bases question if their idols were ever safe in his presence, and whether the industry covered it all up for years. When Jaguar began speaking, she did not just hint at secrets, she ripped the entire curtain down and invited everyone to look directly at the ugliness behind it. She connected names, incidents, and whispers that had long circulated in dark corners of Hollywood gossip, and she said them out loud in a way that could not be ignored. She started with the praise of Magic Johnson as a man who faced his HIV diagnosis head-on and turned it into a legacy of business and empowerment, but immediately flipped that into a brutal comparison to the men she claims are running around undetectable, living recklessly, infecting others, and hiding behind fame and money to protect themselves. The way she framed it was not just about one man, but an entire network of freak-offs, wild parties, and secret tapes where the brightest stars were lured into rooms they could never fully escape from without scars. And at the core of it was Diddy, the supposed host, the director, the man who kept the cameras rolling while celebrities who are now household names, allegedly, became compromised in ways that sound too disturbing to even fully imagine. Think about it. This is not some unknown figure tossing around conspiracy theories. This is Jaguar Wright, someone who has worked inside the industry. Someone who has been around enough stars and executives to understand the language, the settings, and the patterns, and that alone made people sit up straighter when she started naming names. Because once the names started spilling, the internet froze. She was not talking about random extras or forgotten backup dancers. She was talking about icons like Mary J. Blige, Rihanna, Nicki Minaj, Jennifer Lopez, Cassie, Kim Porter, Young Miami, and even more, names that have dominated the charts, the red carpets, and the headlines for decades. Names that entire generations grew up idolizing. And suddenly their legacies are being dragged into the mud of allegations about freak-offs, drugs, cameras, coercion, and infections that could ruin reputations forever. Now, of course, none of this comes with court-certified evidence. There are no official documents confirming the wildest of Jaguar's claims. But that almost does not matter in the court of public opinion, because the way she says it with her chest, without hesitation, forces people to believe that even if half of what she is claiming is true, it means there has been a hidden nightmare running parallel to the music we all grew up with. And the timing could not be more damning, because Diddy is already fighting multiple lawsuits. He is already under the spotlight of federal investigation. And his empire is already beginning to crack like a porcelain vase dropped on concrete. So when Jaguar stepped in with her testimony, it did not feel like a random rant. It felt like the missing puzzle piece that explains why so many stars have whispered about trauma, about manipulation, and about nights they would rather never remember. The way she told it, those infamous parties were not glamorous industry gatherings, but setups designed to entrap people, compromise them on film, and control them forever through fear of exposure. And if that is even partially true, then we are looking at one of the biggest scandals, not just in music history, but in the entire history of American entertainment. Jaguar described cameras hidden everywhere, drugs flowing like water, escorts being brought in, young stars being paired with much older celebrities, and tapes being collected like trophies to be used as leverage whenever someone thought about stepping out of line. She painted Diddy not as a music mogul, but as a puppet master whose empire was built on the broken trust and broken lives of those around him. And she insisted that many women who walked into those parties walked out with infections that changed their lives forever. Infections that they could never publicly reveal without destroying their own careers. The internet, of course, went wild because the more she spoke, the more it connected with the lawsuits we already know exist. With the raids that uncovered bizarre items like thousands of bottles of baby oil and 4 fluids, with the whispers of violence, coercion, and cover-ups that have been haunting Diddy's name for years. And suddenly, it did not feel like wild gossip anymore, but a devastating puzzle finally coming together. What made Jaguar's words even more explosive was not just the names or the accusations, but the way she linked those allegations to a culture of silence that has always surrounded the industry. She claimed that everyone knew about the freak-offs, that people whispered about them in hushed tones, that celebrities traded stories like dirty secrets, but nobody dared speak publicly because the fear of being blacklisted was worse than the trauma of what they had endured. And in that way, she turned the spotlight not only on Diddy, but on the entire machine of Hollywood that allowed him to thrive unchecked for so long. She painted a picture of stars being flown in under the promise of opportunity, told that their careers would be launched into the stratosphere if they played along, and then trapped in situations they could not escape from without either losing everything or carrying secrets that would follow them for life. She insisted that these gatherings were not casual parties, but carefully orchestrated productions, with staff preparing hotel suites like film sets, stocking them with lighting equipment, cameras, props, drugs, and escorts, all under the direction of one man who allegedly sat back and controlled the scenes like a director of his own twisted reality show. The way Jaguar described it made people shiver because it sounded less like a music mogul blowing off steam and more like an organized criminal operation designed to exploit, record, and manipulate the brightest stars of our generation. And when she started saying that infections were passed around like unwanted souvenirs, the scandal exploded into territory that terrified fans, because it suggested not just broken trust, but potentially broken bodies and futures. The public reaction was instant and divided. Half of the internet screaming that Jaguar was finally saying what needed to be said and exposing the rot that had been protected for decades, while the other half insisted she was bitter, unhinged, or simply chasing clout by dragging famous names into the dirt. But the thing about viral narratives is that they do not need unanimous belief to survive. They just need enough shock factor to keep people talking, and Jaguar delivered that in spades. Every interview, every soundbite, every clipped rant went viral within minutes, and blogs devoured her words like candy, framing her as the fearless whistleblower who was willing to burn down the entire industry if it meant telling her truth. The reactions from the fans of the celebrities she named were even wilder, because on one hand they were outraged at the idea that their idols could have been dragged into such filth. But on the other hand, they were terrified that the rumors might actually be true, and the cognitive dissonance created a frenzy of theories, threads, and debates that turned social media into a battlefield. Anonymous sources began to crawl out of the woodwork, claiming that they too had witnessed strange things at Diddy's events. That they had seen stars escorted into private rooms, that they had noticed the heavy security guarding certain wings of mansions or hotels, and though none of these accounts could be verified, they added just enough smoke to the fire to make people believe there had to be something burning underneath. Then came the so-called leaked reports, documents that appeared online claiming to be transcripts of conversations, fragments of NDAs, or inventories of items seized in raids. And whether or not those papers were real was almost irrelevant because the headlines they generated kept the narrative alive. Suddenly you had people pointing to the baby oil, the 4 fluids, the extra linens mentioned in federal reports, asking what kind of legitimate party needed those kinds of supplies, and when Jaguar's words were placed side by side with those details, it looked less like gossip and more like testimony that matched official evidence. Even celebrities who were not named started to get nervous because fans began speculating about who else might have been there, who else might have been compromised, who else might have secrets hiding in some vault of tapes that could one day be released, and the paranoia grew to the point where every red carpet photo with Diddy was scrutinized. Every collaboration was questioned, and every old interview was dug up for clues. The industry itself seemed to go quiet. No denials, no statements, no official pushback, which only fueled more speculation that everyone was terrified to speak because they knew that speaking would mean opening doors they could never close again. It became less about whether every detail of Jaguar's story was true and more about the bigger picture she was painting. That the culture of power, money, and silence had allowed things to happen unchecked for years, that victims were ignored or silenced, that careers were controlled through coercion, and that the public had been consuming art and entertainment built on a foundation of pain. And as the days went by and the videos kept circulating, the narrative solidified. People no longer asked if something had happened. They asked how much of it had happened, how many lives had been damaged, how many stars were carrying infections, and secrets they could never publicly acknowledge, and what other icons might be dragged into the light. Before this storm ended, as the noise grew louder and the whispers turned into shouts, the question on everyone's mind was no longer whether Diddy could survive the scandal, but how many others would fall with him, because if Jaguar was right, then the list of names tied to these freak-offs was longer than anyone dared to imagine, and the potential fallout stretched far beyond one man's empire. It meant that labels, managers, executives, and even other artists could be implicated in a cycle of silence and complicity that spanned decades and reached every corner of the industry. Already people were demanding that federal investigators widen their probe, that the raids were just the tip of the iceberg, that if they dug deeper, they would find vaults of tapes and digital archives filled with blackmail material that had been used to control stars and silence victims. And the fear of what could surface was enough to send shivers down the spine of anyone who had ever stepped foot in those circles. Jaguar's words kept looping online. Her accusations about infections and undetectable carriers spreading faster than any official statement could contain. And the more people replayed her interviews, the more they connected dots between her claims and the lawsuits already filed. From Cassie's explosive accounts of abuse to April Lamprez's detailed testimony about being drugged and assaulted. And suddenly it looked like the stories were no longer isolated incidents, but part of a much darker pattern. The fallout became cultural too, because fans started questioning the entire narrative of hip-hop and R&B icons, wondering how many of the love songs and party anthems were created in studios, run by men who were also orchestrating horrors behind Closed doors, and for younger fans who only knew Diddy as a smiling judge on talent shows or a billionaire entrepreneur, it was like discovering that the fairy tale was built on quicksand. Media outlets hungry for clicks fanned the flames with think pieces, timelines, and speculative analyses that blurred fact and rumor until the two became indistinguishable. And every day there was a new viral thread about who had been seen entering which mansion, who had mysteriously disappeared from the charts after refusing advances, or who might secretly be carrying the infections Jaguar insisted were passed around at those gatherings. Meanwhile, lawyers circled like vultures, filing motions, preparing cases, and whispering to reporters that the indictments could expand, that RICO charges were not off the table, that this was not just about sex or drugs, but about organized crime, on a scale that the music industry had never been forced to confront before. The silence from the celebrity she named grew heavier as days passed without denial or defense, and fans interpreted that silence as guilt, as fear, as proof that Jaguar had struck a nerve too deep to ignore, and every hour that passed without a statement was another hour where the internet built its own narrative of infections, coercion, and complicity. Theories got wilder by the day, some insisting that entire careers were manufactured as payoff for compliance. Others suggesting that awards and chart placements were used as carrots to keep people quiet. And in the middle of it all, Diddy himself was portrayed as a king watching his empire burn, unable to control the flames because too many voices were speaking at once and too many pieces of evidence were lining up against him. The possibility of high-profile trials became the obsession of commentators who imagined celebrities being dragged into court, forced to testify about what they had seen, what they had done, and what they had contracted, and those imagined scenes were enough to keep the public hooked even without concrete updates from the authorities. The scandal had grown legs of its own, and it no longer mattered whether Jaguar's every word could be proven in a court of law. What mattered was that the perception of corruption, infection, and exploitation had sunk its teeth into the culture and refused to let go. For many, it was not even about Diddy anymore, but about a system that seemed designed to protect predators while sacrificing victims. A system that had turned music into a cover for crimes and forced fans to reconsider what it meant to support the stars they loved. And so the suspense only grew. Every headline, every anonymous source, every whispered allegation layered onto the story like bricks in a collapsing tower. And the world watched with a mix of horror and fascination, waiting to see who would be dragged into the spotlight next, who would confess, who would deny, and who would remain silent as the storm swallowed everything around it. Now the real question is, what do you believe? Because after everything we've just unpacked, you have to admit that the line between gossip and reality has been blurred too. The point where you cannot even tell where one ends and the other begins. And maybe that is exactly the point. Because scandals like this thrive on silence and speculation. But here's the thing. Silence is no longer an option, and neither is pretending that this is just another celebrity. Drama that will fade away in a week, because if Jaguar is even half right, then what we are looking at is not just one man falling from grace, but an entire culture being forced to face its own reflection in the mirror. And that is where you come in, because I want to hear what you think. Do you believe the names she dropped really got caught up in the nightmare? Do you believe the infections, the tapes, the coercion? Do you think this is just another round of smoke with no fire at the end of it? So drop your thoughts enough. Comments, smash that like button, subscribe for more, because the truth is only getting messier from here.